The men at the trading post didn't speak her name. They spit when they saw her, turned their faces away like she was a bad wind passing through. One called her filthy witch blood beneath his breath. Another crossed himself. The bravest of them, a boy no older than 15, threw a handful of mud at her bare feet and yelled, "Devil girl!" She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She just stood there in the cold, her hair matted with ash and snow, her shawl torn, her hands tucked under her arms to stop the shaking. And not one man offered her a coat. 3 miles up the mountain, Silas. Boone stirred his fire with a stick, watching the flames eat the last of the dry pine. His cabin sat at the edge of timberline, where the trees thinned out and the wind never quite slept. Snow covered the world outside like a quiet punishment. He hadn't been to town in weeks, didn't plan to go back for a while. Silas was a man who'd long stopped caring about what others thought. His beard was thick, grizzled gray. His hands were calloused, scarred from years of trapping and building and losing. Folks called him a recluse. The kind of man who didn't wave when he passed. They didn't know he buried a wife 8 winters ago, didn't know he hadn't touched a bottle since that night. They just knew he lived alone. That morning, he'd seen the crows circling, maybe a dozen of them, black dots against the pale winter sky, swarming just east of Dead Elk Trail. He figured something died out there. Maybe a mule, maybe a man, but he didn't saddle up. Not until the wind shifted, and he heard the singing. Not a song, really, just a low, broken hum. Like someone had forgotten the words, but kept the rhythm to stay alive. To be why the time he found her, the sun was already ducking behind the ridgeline. She was barefoot, sitting cross-legged beneath a burned-out pine, her arms streaked with soot and bruises. Her hair was braided in the old way, 3 cords wrapped in bone beads, torn halfway loose, and her lips were purple with cold. She looked up at him like she expected a bullet. What she didn't expect was the coat. He didn't speak as he took it off, just wrapped it around her shoulders, slow, careful, like she might shatter if he moved too fast. Her body trembled under the weight of it, eyes darting to the rifle strapped across his back. But he didn't reach for it. He reached into his satchel and handed her a strip of jerky. She didn't eat right away, just stared at it like it might bite her. "I ain't a skin your name," Silas said quietly. "Don't care what they say in town, neither." Her eyes narrowed that he pointed toward the trail. "Cabin's that way. It's warm. Got stew. That's." When she looked down at her own hands, fingers stiff and raw, nails cracked, skin like cracked earth. "No," she rasped. "No. If I go with you, they'll say you're cursed too." Silas didn't blink. "Let him." She blinked hard. Once, twice, and then fainted straight into the snow. The stew was hot when she woke, and the cabin smelled of pine pitch and tobacco. She was on the floor beside the hearth, wrapped in 2 wool blankets, the fire crackling steady. Her face was flushed from the heat. Her eyes darted to the door. Silas sat across the room, sharpening a blade on a leather strop. He didn't look up. "Figured you were starving," he said. "Didn't want to wake you." Her voice came out dry. "Why did you bring me here?" Silas shrugged. "You were half dead. Most would have let me stay that way. Most don't know better." She studied him. "I don't steal," she said. "I know. I don't cast spells." "I know. That too." Silence filled the room like snowfall. Soft, thick, heavy. "Finally," she said, "my name is Willa." Silas looked up. Willa, that he hadn't heard that name in years. Not since the old scout Samuel Ridgewater told a story at the saloon about a mixed-blood girl whose mother died during childbirth and whose father was chased off by miners. A girl who grew up sleeping in hollowed trees and drinking creek water with frost on top. A girl they said carried bad luck on her shoulders like a second skin. He remembered the way Ridgewater spit after saying her name. "Willa," Silas repeated, quietly. "Well, welcome home then." That word made her flinch. "Home? You can't keep me here," she said. He leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees. "You got somewhere else to be?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. "Didn't think so." Outside, the wind howled. A shutter creaked on its hinge. Snow had begun to fall again, soft and steady. Willa pulled the blanket tighter. "Someone burned my village," she whispered. "Said we were devil-born. Said mixing blood made us cursed. Said it was better to erase us." Silas watched her for a long moment. "I seen curses," he said. "You ain't one of them." Willa's eyes began to shine. She turned toward the fire so he wouldn't see. But he did. And he let her. Just then, the howl of wolves echoed from the ridgeline. Not close, but not far either. Willa's shoulders tensed. Silas stood slowly and walked to the door, rifle in hand. "They'll be talking about you," she said behind him. "They'll come. They always do." Silas looked out into the snow. "Let him come," he said. Then he shut the door. The door didn't stay shut for long. By morning, smoke had reached town. Not from the cabin, but from the story, spreading fast through coffee mugs and cracker barrels, across sawdust floors, and under the slow sweep of broomsticks. In a place like Bitterroot Crossing, gossip traveled faster than the telegraph. And by the time the noon bell rang at the church, 3 different versions of the tale had already taken root. Some said the mountain man had taken a half-dead squaw into his bed. Others said she bewitched him, and now he walked like a man half asleep. One woman swore she saw her with a forked tongue. But the only version that mattered came from a man named John McCready. That McCready ran the mercantile and chaired the town council, which didn't mean much, but it gave him a place to stand when he pointed his finger. His brother had died in a raid 10 years back, and John never forgave anyone who so much as wore braids. He was the sort of man who didn't just want someone gone. He wanted them erased. "She's the one from Dead Elk," he said. "The cursed one. Folks who let her live are next in line to rot." And just like that, the room agreed. Silas was out behind the cabin splitting logs when the sound of hoofbeats pulled his gaze downhill. 3 riders. No urgency in the pace. Just that slow, steady roll of men who thought they belonged wherever they went. He put the axe down, wiped his palms, and waited. The horses came to a stop at the edge of the clearing. The middle rider was McCready. The other 2 were hired guns, strangers Silas didn't recognize, but their stances were stiff with purpose. "Boone," McCready called. "You got a visitor in there?" Silas didn't answer. "You know the town won't tolerate that sort of filth." Still, he said nothing. McCready leaned forward in his saddle, face red from the cold. "She's poison, Boone. That girl don't bring anything but bad signs and ruined land." "You here to talk?" Silas said finally. "Or you here to try something?" The pause stretched. "Now hold on," McCready said. "We're just to skin you to do what's right. You want to help her? Fine. Give her some bread, some water. But don't make her think she's welcome." Behind him, one of the hired men shifted in his saddle and rested a hand on the butt of his pistol. Silas looked at it, then looked at McCready. "I buried my wife in that ground over there," he said, pointing past the split-rail fence. "She was half Cherokee. Never cursed. Nobody." McCready laughed, but it was hollow. "Forced. You want to start up another war, Boone? 'Cause that's how it happens. You open your door to one of them, and next thing you know, your house is gone and your horses got arrows in their bellies." "I open my door to people," Silas said. "Not ghosts from your past." The man with the pistol stepped forward, and that's when the cabin door creaked open. Willa stood in the doorway, wrapped in one of Silas's old coats, hair still damp from washing, eyes steady. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. McCready saw her and spat into the snow. "You keep her, Boone," he said coldly. "You were her stink. But if she sets one foot in town, she won't make it back." He turned his horse and rode off without waiting for agreement. The other 2 followed. The wind kicked up behind them. Willa stepped back inside without a word. That night, the silence inside the cabin was different. He could feel her watching him, not with fear anymore, but with questions she hadn't decided whether to ask. Silas stirred the stew in the pot and watched the flames flicker. "You don't have to fight my fight," she said quietly. "I already am." "Why?" He took a long breath. "'Cause when I was 15, I was out hunting with my uncle. We came across a Lakota woman giving birth under a tree. She was alone, bleeding bad. My uncle raised his rifle. Said the world didn't need more savages." Willa's face changed. Silas didn't look at her. Just kept stirring. I stopped him. Screamed loud enough that he missed his shot. Woman crawled off. Took the baby with her. I never saw her again. He finally looked up. "But I've been waiting ever since to make that scream mean something." Willa swallowed hard. Her fingers curled in her lap, knuckles white. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. "They always do." He ladled stew into 2 bowls and handed one to her. "But if you're still hungry in the morning, I'll keep cooking." She took the bowl. Didn't speak for a long time, but she ate every bite at sunrise. 3 more men rode up the trail, Silas was already on the porch with his rifle propped beside him. Willa stood just inside, clutching a bundle of dried herbs she'd been boiling for tea. She moved to the window when she saw the riders. This time, they weren't from town. These were U.S. cavalry. Blue coats and brass buttons, neat and polite as crows on a fence. The one in front tipped his hat. "Morning. You Silas Boone?" "I am. We had a settler go missing a few days ago near Dead Elk Trail. Word in town is you brought someone home who might have seen what happened." Silas narrowed his eyes. "She didn't see nothing. We'd like to ask her anyway." He didn't move. "She's resting." "Well," the soldier said, still smiling, "maybe we'll wait a while." Lot of concern about the safety of the area. These mixed blood types tend to stir up feelings, you know. Silas's jaw tensed. Inside, Willa held the tea a little tighter. Dunno. Threats were made. But the message was clear. They weren't alone anymore. And neither was she. The snow kept falling, light and dry, settling on every surface like dust on an old Bible. For 3 days, the cavalry men didn't leave. They set up a lean-to down the hill, near the creek, claiming they were just waiting for orders, just keeping the trail secure. But they never strayed far from view of Silas's cabin. Every time Willa stepped out to gather firewood or shake blankets, she felt their eyes on her. They never spoke, but they watched, like surveyors measuring a piece of land they planned to carve up. Silas kept chopping wood, splitting log after log like nothing had changed, but the way he glanced toward the tree line told her everything. T was waiting. And then, just before dawn on the 4th day, came the sound. Not horses, not boots, drums, faint at first, low as a heartbeat beneath the earth, but steady, carried on the wind. Willa was already awake, sitting near the fire, holding her knees to her chest. The moment the rhythm reached her ears, she turned her head sharply toward the window. Silas stirred in his cot. "You hear that? They're here," she whispered. "They've come for me." Silas sat up slowly, lit the lantern, and opened the door. Snow crunched beneath boot heels. The cold stung his face like needles. He stood still for a long time, listening. The drums grew louder. Closer, not many. Maybe a dozen men. No war cries. No torches. Just that beat. Hollow, haunting, calm in the way only dangerous things can. By noon. They were visible on the ridge. 11 men and 1 elder in a fur cloak. They wore a mix of deerskin and worn Union coats, all silent, faces painted not for war, but for memory. Their horses waited behind them like shadows. Willa stood on the porch, shoulders wrapped in Silas's coat, her breath rising in little puffs. Her hands were shaking again, not from fear this time, from something older, deeper. The man in the center raised one hand. A peace sign. Silas returned the gesture. The elder stepped forward, slow but sure-footed. He stopped 20 yards from the cabin and spoke in Lakota first. Then, after a pause, in broken English, "We are not here for blood." Silas glanced at Willa. "She's part of us," the elder continued. "We left her once, because we believed the lies the white men told. That mixing with them meant shame, that her blood would curse the ground." Willa stepped off the porch. Her boots crunched in the snow, but the earth did not die. The elder said, looking only at her. "The snow still fell. The elk still birthed. We were wrong." He bowed his head. The other warriors followed. "You are not cursed, Willa," he said. "You are Bridgeborn. You belong to both paths. And we were too blind to see." Silas stood behind her, silent, watching. The cavalry men had come up the hill by now, rifles in hand, tension thick in the air. But no one moved. The elder looked past Willa to Silas. "We come not for war. We come to offer her a place again, if she wants it." Willa looked between them. The elder, the warriors, the men who once abandoned her. Then at Silas, his quiet eyes, hands at his sides, never pushing. Her voice cracked when she spoke. I don't know where I belong anymore." The elder nodded solemnly. "That is the burden of bridges." From the trees came a soft sound. A baby's cry. One of the warriors stepped forward, unwrapped a bundle. A half-white, half-Lakota child. Willa's eyes welled with tears. "You are not alone anymore," the elder said. "There are more like you now. Girls and boys who don't fit in either camp. We need someone to teach them both languages. Both hearts." Silas stepped forward, his voice low. "You don't have to decide now." "I already have," she whispered. looked at the elder. Not yet. I need more time. I want to learn how to live without shame first. Then she turned to Silas. I want to stay here. The elder said nothing for a long moment. Then he smiled, sad, but proud. Then you are stronger than we were. He turned. One by one, the warriors followed. No anger, no cries, just quiet, understanding. The cavalrymen shifted, unsure whether to raise their rifles. But they didn't. The drums didn't beat again. The war never came. The sun dipped low, spilling orange across the snow. Willa stood in the doorway, fingers curled around the edge of the frame, watching them disappear into the trees. Silas poured water into a kettle and set it on the fire. You could have gone, he said. I know. You still can. She shook her head. I want to learn what it means to stay. And for the first time since the mountain took her in, she smiled. The days that followed were quiet. Not the kind of silence that made your skin itch. The kind that settled in your bones and made you believe, for the first time in years, that maybe the world wasn't always trying to take something from you. Willa swept the porch every morning, like she'd seen Silas do. She folded blankets just the way he did, tight corners, no wasted space. She learned the way the cabin breathed, how the floor creaked near the hearth, how the wind slipped through the chinked logs at night, how the kettle rattled just before it boiled, and Silas watched her learn, without stepping in. Without correcting point one night, as they shelled beans by firelight, Willa said, You don't ask many questions. I don't need many answers. She looked at him, her fingers stilling. Even about me? Silas shrugged. You talk when you're ready. That's how it ought to be. Willa turned her gaze back to the bowl. The silence stretched. The fire cracked. Then, soft as a breath, she spoke. My mother was Apache, but raised by white traders. She never felt at home with her own people or theirs. Then she met my father, a farm boy from Missouri who thought she hung the stars. They tried to build something out here, something real. But neither side accepted it. When she got sick, giving birth to me, no one came. Not her people. Not his. Silas didn't speak. He didn't need to. I grew up half-fed, half-named, half-wanted, she said. And somewhere along the way, I started believing I really was cursed. Like I poisoned whatever I touched. Silas leaned back in his chair, the firelight dancing across his face. My wife's name was Anna, he said after a moment. Her daddy was Cherokee, mother was Irish. She used to laugh at me for how much salt I put in my beans. Willa smiled faintly. She taught me how to plant corn in dry soil. Said everything needed a second chance, even dirt. He looked over at her. I buried her right after our second winter. Fever took her. Same week a preacher in town said. Our kind of marriage was a sin against God. Willa's smile faded. He said grief was the Lord's punishment. I said it was the world's cowardice. The room settled into stillness again. But this time it was full. Not empty. One morning, a week later, the cavalry packed up and left without a word and no warning. No ceremony. Just gone, like snow melting off a roof. All that remained was the broken fire ring they'd used and boot prints in the mud. Silas stood on the ridge and watched their trail vanish behind the trees. Willa stepped up beside him. You think they were waiting for the warriors to strike? Maybe, he said. Or maybe they saw what I saw. What's that? That. This ain't a war zone. He looked at her. It's a home. She didn't answer right away. Her breath caught in her throat, a sudden weight rising behind her eyes. You really believe that? I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't. Willa turned away, her arms wrapped around herself. She didn't want him to see the tears. But she couldn't stop them. Not this time. He didn't move toward her. Didn't try to fix it. Just stood there beside her, watching the trail. After a while, she said, You think people can unlearn hate? Silas nodded. It's harder than learning it. But yeah, I've seen it done. They stood there until the sun cleared the ridge and the light broke across the trees like stained glass. That night, Willa opened the small leather pouch she'd kept tied to her waist since the day Silas found her in the snow. Inside was a stone, smooth, round, black. It looked like nothing special, but she turned it over in her palm with care. What is it? Silas asked. My father gave it to me, she said. Said it was from the river where he first saw my mother bathing. He kept it to remind himself that even in a world that didn't want them together, something good could still be shaped by water. She held it out. I want you to have it. Silas shook his head. You sure? She placed it in his calloused palm. You helped shape Me, she said, even when the world wanted me washed away. He looked down at the stone, silent. Then he nodded once and closed his hand around it. Outside, the wind picked up. But inside the cabin, the fire kept burning steady, and neither of them felt cold. Spring arrived the way it always did in the mountains, slow, unsure, then all at once. The drifts melted into rivulets that cut through the hard-packed earth, carrying the memory of winter downhill. The trees budded. The ravens grew quiet. And the girl they called Cursed began planting seeds. Willa crouched by the garden bed. Silas helped her dig. Just a square of turned dirt behind the cabin, nothing fancy. But her hands moved like they belonged there. She whispered as she worked, humming the songs her mother once sang over planted corn, her voice low and reverent. Silas watched her from the porch, a mug of coffee cooling in his grip. "You talk to the dirt?" he asked, teasing gently. She didn't look up. "The dirt listens better than most people." He grunted, amused. "That it does." Behind him, the cabin door creaked as he stepped inside. When he returned, he carried something wrapped in oilskin. "Was gonna wait till the first harvest," he said, holding it out. "But I reckon now's as good a time as any." She took it, slowly unwrapping the cloth, revealing a worn, leather-bound book. Her eyes widened. "English on the left," he said. "Lakota on the right. Side by side." Willa's fingers trembled. She opened the cover. Her lips moved silently over the first line. "Where did you get this?" "Traded for it in Laramie. Old preacher had no use for it anymore. Thought it might help you with those kids," the elder mentioned. Her voice caught. "You remembered that?" Silas looked at her. "I remember everything you say." She closed the book and held it tight against her chest. That was the first day she wept with joy. 2 months later, a young boy arrived at the cabin. Barefoot, 10 years old at most. Skin like copper, eyes too wise for his age. He said his name was Isaiah, and that his mother told him to find the bridge woman who could teach him both tongues. Behind him came more. A girl who couldn't speak but carried a carved bird. In her pocket, a half-Mexican toddler abandoned by a freight camp cook. A brother and sister, both too quiet and too thin. Willa took them in one by one, as she taught them how to make broth with bones, how to brush their hair with pine sap, how to say thank you in 3 languages, and she taught them stories, not just the ones about white men with guns and tribes on the run, but stories about survival, about warmth, about the courage to stay when it would be easier to run. Silas built bunks into the walls of the cabin, added a second chimney, hung rabbit skins along the rafters to keep in the heat. He never complained. When someone asked him if he'd opened an orphanage, he said, "No, just made room." One morning, a rider approached from town. Dusty, cautious, had LOWIT was Mary Ellis, the midwife's daughter. She dismounted slowly and held her hands out. "I come in peace," she said. "Swear it." Willa opened the door. The kids huddled behind her, curious but calm. Mary removed her gloves. "Word is you've got away with sick little ones." Willa nodded slowly. "Who's sick?" Mary hesitated. "My brother's boy. Pale, fevered. No appetite. They tried the doctor. He bled him twice. Got worse." Willa glanced at Silas. He didn't say a word. Just nodded once. That afternoon, she rode into town with Mary. For the first time since she was chased from that same trail, she passed the wooden signs without shrinking. She healed the boy, left a tea recipe and a carved bead for protection. Then, she rode back before sunset, her chin high, her hands steady. Nobody tried to stop her. Years passed. The garden grew wider. The cabin grew taller. Children became teenagers. Some left to find their own lives. Others stayed to help. The townsfolk didn't all change. Some still crossed the street when they saw her. Others couldn't even meet her eye. But they stopped whispering. You can only call someone cursed for so long when everything they touch begins to bloom. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the crickets began their songs, Willa sat on the porch steps, arms resting on her knees. Silas stepped out beside her. His beard was grayer now, his steps a little slower. She handed him a tin cup of tea. He took it, smiling. "You know, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I never rode out to that ridge." She looked at him. "You would have stayed warm." He laughed, a low, weathered sound. "Would have stayed lonely too." Willa looked toward the field, where the children were chasing each other through the grass. "You ever think we were meant to find each other?" she asked. Silas stared ahead. "I don't believe in fate." Then what do you believe in? He took a sip of tea, exhaled. Slow. Kindness, he said. When it cost you something. She didn't speak for a long time, just leaned her shoulder against his, and together, in the fading light, they listened to the sounds of life all around them. Laughter, hoofbeats in the distance, wind through tall grass. The cabin, once built for one, stood full of stories. The woman once called cursed had become their keeper, and the mountain man who carried her home had never once looked back.